Hello guys, today I want to present the Dungeon Quest Iceberg, which includes entries questioning almost every aspect of the game, from the most common entries to the most obscure. So whenever you're ready, buckle up, sit tight, and get ready to deep dive within the depths of Dungeon Quest knowledge. Keffi, also known as Vinny, is the official creator and previous owner of Dungeon Quest. Keffi released the game back in 2018 with the help of his brother Jay Keffi. Together, they made what will be known as the best dungeon crawler game of Roblox of its time. This is also common knowledge. In the summer of 2023, Keffi decided to move on in his life and sell his game to a group of developers named Voldex. Voldex owns about a dozen games and has done so for years and months. Voldex has brought many new updates and dungeons, boosting the Dungeon Quest player base. In each of the lobbies, you have a blacksmith at your disposal. However, blacksmith was also a dev for Keffi when he still owned the game. Blacksmith specialized in building the dungeon walls, hence his title. I'm not sure if he built all of the dungeons, but I'm certain he did all the dungeons above level 100. During the 8th annual Bloxy Awards in 2020, a sort of Roblox version of the Oscars, it came to everyone's surprise that the Builderman's Award, a very special trophy given to exclusive games, was handed over to Keffi and Dungeon Quest. Only 2 games received that special Bloxy Award that year, and Dungeon Quest was one of them. Ultimate Weapons is a new class of weapons added in December of 2021. It was characterized by its red background and being stronger than legendary weapons. Sadly, these ultimate weapons can only be obtained in Northernland's Nightmare on the bonus boss battle. Therefore, other legendaries from Gilded Skies or Yokai Peak are better. As most of you know, on any given server, in whatever region you may be in, there has been at least one cosmetic item on a player. Cosmetics were an addition almost as old as the game itself. They were added to spice up the game in artistic ways and could hide your ugly armor. Cosmetics can be distinguished into 4 categories: enchants, used to light up weapons, weapons, armors, and titles. With the recent updates from Voldex, especially with their shops, cosmetics have become commonplace within the Dungeon Quest community and can be seen wherever you go. Now this is a mystery that remains partially unsolved to this day. If you've been around in the game for a decent amount of time and are above level 110, you may have noticed that the wave defense option ends after the Canals dungeon. Even though there is no official answer to this, I'm supposing it's because wave defense is a very easy way of getting EXP and should be used by low level players to catch up quickly and get into the game without having to grind for long hours. However, if that's the case, then why don't they move it up as more dungeons are made? For example, a player with a level 150 are considered as noobs, yet they weren't a few years ago. This is why I think wave defense needs to change, or at least add some more dungeons, since the gap between really low level noobs and the pros is getting bigger every day. When Voldex acquired Dungeon Quest, one of their first decisions was to unbanish all of the banned players of before. I believe this was done to bring as many players into the game as possible. However, perhaps if these players were banned, it was for a good reason. If you've ever been a little curious about the first lobby in Dungeon Quest, you might have noticed the Excalibur, and what is known as the Excalibur Quest. The Excalibur Quest refers to the completion of all the stones with their light beams. As of recording this, in nearly 2024, there are only 3 of the 5 rocks that can be lit up. Now, upon seeing this sword, one can ask himself many questions. What is it used for? Why is it inside a rock? Who put it there? As much as we may ask ourselves, we may never fully know the full extent of Dungeon Quest knowledge. The last entry on this level is the legendary spells. These spells were supposedly added in October of 2019 with the Steampunk Sewers dungeon. The legendary spell would be a damage spell, in theory. However, there has been not enough proof for this to be true and no one has actually seen one possessing one, so it was probably just a rumor. However, in July of 2020, when Volcanic Chambers Dungeon was released, 2 official legendary spells came out. Those were Enhanced Inner Focus and Enhanced Inner Rage, or EIF and EIR for short. These spells would allow you to walk faster and attack with more damage. This was a good addition to the game, as legendary weapons had existed in the game since it was created. What remains to be seen is legendary armor, but we'll talk about that later. If you've been an adamant Dungeon Quest player, then I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of exploit kicking. It happens to you when you're peacefully enjoying your game and all of a sudden, you're out. This pop-up kick has appeared countless times on the screens of players who haven't even been exploiting or any other shenanigans of the sort. It would happen when you did one of the following things: had high ping, used auto-clicker too much, stood above the ground in one way or another, or managed to lodge yourself in a certain position underwater. Despite many attempts from the devs to fix this, it still remains an ongoing bug. The good news is that it's just a kick and you should be able to play when you rejoin. One of the greatest mysteries of Dungeon Quests. If you've been curious enough to explore Lobby 1 or have a walk on the jetty there, you may have noticed the two enormous doors standing on the side of the mountain. This puzzle is as old as the game itself, and many believe this is part of the infamous Excalibur quest, that perhaps the Infinity Stone should be finally collected by going through that door. The problem is, no one has. However, remember that this is but a theory. If you take a closer look at the back area of Lobby 2, the place that is usually empty, you can notice two gargantuan doors. One appears to be open and leading somewhere. Where though? That is to be answered. However, I do have a personal speculation I wish to communicate. I believe that these doors lead to either two places: the Underworld Dungeon or the Volcanic Chambers Dungeon. Added the pieces up? Good. These two dungeons have big doors at their spawn, big doors that could just possibly be the exit into the lobby. But let me remind you, this is only my hopeful speculation. This is one of the last things we think about when thinking about Dungeon Quest today. Player versus player has never been a thing, and the closest we ever got to seeing who is the strongest is taking it out on the salesman dummy bag. Why is it in that entry on this list then? Well, for the simple reason that in March of 2020, around the time Vikefi earned his Bloxy, the same man posted a message on Discord announcing that he wished to open a test environment to the public. His plan was to create a new game with new classes. We'll talk about that later on. However, this game was released, it never really caught on due to its striking difference to Dungeon Quest. The project itself was abandoned, leaving Dungeon Quest PvP a part of history. Take a look at this picture. I know it's bad quality and all, but it's the only one I could find of the infamous Vinny's Lab. These two words would ring a bell only if you've been in the DQ community for a considerable amount of time. Vinny's Lab was proposed as a dungeon from level 200 to 210, what is now Yokai Peak. And as a joke, it would mean that the last dungeon of the game would be the creator or the god's laboratory, Vinny's Lab. Vinny's Lab was not the only joke dungeon at the time. There was also a dungeon called Dragon's Den, which sounds similar to Gilded Skies. Just saying. In the end, I think it's a good idea that the community made these jokes, and I think it would have been nice to have Vinny's Lab as a dungeon. This is yet another mystery surrounding the Dungeon Quest fanbase. Just as there have been rumours about legendary spells, now we're talking about legendary armor. Officially, if you look within the wiki and search in game, you won't be able to find any armor type above epic. Now don't worry, I know there are videos of YouTube showing that some players got all legendary armor, and although I'd hate to say this, I've got to say it looks authentic. Strangely, this unrecorded, unregistered piece of armor is in the game. It's almost as if the devs don't want you to find out about it. Which would explain its absence from the wiki. All these videos may be all great big photoshopped hoaxes, but if they aren't, then these armors are extremely rare, since in my life of playing Dungeon Quest, I have not seen one person with this type of armor. Now that we've entered the deepest part of this iceberg, it's time to talk about the extreme limits of knowledge on Dungeon Quest. Beyond this point, anything is just undiscovered or not of the game. Now, you might be wondering why I put Lobby 2 here. Well, when one goes to Lobby 2, there is one question that comes into mind when you think about it. Why? Why does Lobby 2 even exist? What's its objective? Now, I know that it's a higher level lobby for players of a high level, mainly used for trading and carrying. The problem is, these two actions can be done perfectly in Lobby 1. Now, you could argue that it's a trading zone for professional players, but as we've seen, that term has become way too vague now. What I mean by why does Lobby 2 even exist is why was a small port village built next to a giant ominous building and massive doors built inside a mountain? Why are there chains on the doors? Perhaps all this is for the aesthetic, but it sure doesn't explain a lot. I mean, apart from Blacksmith and the Salesman, both lobbies are devoid of civilians. Or maybe the players were meant to be the civilians? Something isn't right here. Many players have surely asked themselves these questions. Who built the town in Lobby 1? Why is there a big crystal connected with light beams that come from magic stones? Who built all these structures? There is an infinity of unanswered questions in the game. I could make an entire video about them. It all comes down to lore, the story of the game. This is what most of us are disappointed in. There is none. Absolutely nothing. Dungeon Quest has no official lore, so to speak. It was just made to be enjoyed and used, a bit like the naturally generated structures in Minecraft. Theories do exist, like the players are actually the builders, or the builders are just hiding, or the builders are already gone extinct. And also, what is the explanation for all the mobs and the bosses in the game? I mean, there are so many questions. This is why I believe it is our duty, the player's duty, to write this unexisting lore to Dungeon Quest. It would surely be nice to understand who created the town and what the magical crystal does. Does it protect the town from evil mobs or pirates? The question remains to be answered. Now, you know as much as I do that in Dungeon Quest there are 3 main classes: Warrior, Mage, and Guardian. The game makes that obvious by only giving armor for these 3 classes. However, what if I told you that 2 more classes were meant to be added in, but they scrapped it? Indeed, during the official testing phase for Dungeon Quest PvP back in March of 2020, Vikafi had the intention to add 2 new classes as a sort of test, to diversify the armor and abilities of Dungeon Quest, as well as give more appeal and choice in the game. The archers would fire from a bow and arrow and shoot into the sky, whilst the paladin would sneak up on an enemy and give a surprise attack. Although these ideas appeared cool at first, as I told you, DQ PvP got scrapped with time. The reason was that it felt too unnatural to add that into the game. This entry refers to the Dungeon Quest lore and its many questions, but of all of them, one certainly catches the eye. That of the 2 great castle towers over in the distance. What could those towers be? Could they be the towers of the King's Castle dungeon? Not likely, since nothing of the sort is ever seen there. Could it be some kind of dungeon or future lobby? Perhaps. Or maybe it could mean that there is a king of these lands or some kind of royalty. Then why don't we see any of them or any sign of them anywhere in the lobbies? Indeed, Dungeon Quest bears many curiosities and oddities. Its architecture intrigues us in particular. And that was the entire completed Dungeon Quest Iceberg 2023. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, then leave a like. I wish to thank every single one of you who subscribed or watched my content during this year, 2023. It was truly one of the most productive and memorable years of YouTube for me, and I will pursue my goals and objectives to bring better content to you every time. I wish you all a happy new year, and as always, see you in the next one.